Hey everybody, today I want to talk to you about this super cool camera. This is the Olympus OM-2S. This is the Rodney Dangerfield of Olympus cameras. It fits in between the OM-2 and the OM-4 Ti, OM-4 series, and it gets no respect. People don't even know this one exists. But it's a super cool camera. In fact, if the New Jersey weather will ever get above sub-freezing temperatures, maybe I'll be able to go outside and shoot some. I did some shots in the house just to test its features, and I'm sold. This is my new favorite 35mm SLR. This camera is a sleeper. The full name is the OM-2S program. The program stands for program mode. The S stands for spot metering. And this camera fits squarely between the OM-2 and the OM-4. And in fact, it has more in common with the OM-4 than the OM-2. Think OM-2 with OM-4 DNA. There's electronics in here. This actually has a microprocessor, so it's fancier than a lot of the other cameras at the time. This camera has two really cool features that were fairly advanced at the time it was made. One of those features was pretty rare across all the film SLRs ever made. I'm going to let the cat out of the bag right away with the first feature, the one that was rare, and that is called off-the-film metering. This camera meters the shot as the shutter is open by looking at the light that's reflecting off the film. Allow me to demonstrate. Here's the Canon A1. I'm going to set this to f/16, cock the shutter, cover the lens with my hand, fire the shutter, take my hand off. And it takes a few seconds before the shutter closes. The Canon A1 took an exposure reading and locked in the exposure as soon as I press the shutter release. That's the way all SLRs have behaved since the beginning of time, except for the Olympus. Let's do the same thing with the Olympus. f/16, auto, cock the shutter, cover the lens, release the shutter, and you see what happened? Cock the shutter, cover the lens, release the shutter. As soon as I uncover the lens, the shutter closes. That's because the camera is sensing light on the fly. As soon as I take my hand off the lens, the new light coming in tells the camera to close the shutter. Take the lens off and look inside. If you look in the bottom, I don't know if you can see that, but you'll see there is a silicon photodiode right in the bottom center. And it's aimed up at the film plane. It's kind of like having a little slide projector projecting onto a movie screen. It's angled up from the bottom like that. And when you go to take a shot, the mirror flips up, the shutter opens, and that little silicon photodiode gathers photons as the light enters the lens and hits the film. And the camera simply counts photons until it's done and closes the shutter. That is completely different from the way that most SLRs metered light. The other Olympus cameras did the same thing, and that's pretty cool. That's the special feature that the Olympus line had, the off-the-film metering. It was, in practice, more of a party trick than anything, because at the shutter speeds you're usually going to be shooting at, which is above a 60th of a second, they couldn't use that feature. It all comes down to the max shutter sync speed, the flash sync speed. With SLRs, the way that the shutter works is you've got curtains, one that opens and the other that closes. And for any shutter speed above the max sync speed, it's like this. You've got a traveling slit. And if you were to fire the flash at, say, 1/250th of a second, you're going to get a letterbox view of a section of the image. You're not going to get the whole thing. That same image scanning effect of the shutter affects the silicon photodiode gathering the photons as it's doing the exposure live. So above 1/60th of a second, they couldn't use that feature. What they did instead was they printed a cool random design on the front shutter curtain. And when you fire the shutter, the mirror flips up and the photodiode looks at the light reflecting off of that random pattern, takes a meter reading, and then uses that for the rest of the shot. So the camera is actually taking a meter reading instantly before opening the shutter, which is not uncommon, but that's not quite the same as the off-the-film metering, which is really the cool thing. Why is off-the-film metering so darn cool? It's cool because imagine you put this camera on a tripod and you take a photo in a dark scene at night or something like that. You do not need to worry about how long to keep the shutter open. It's going to stay open long enough to do the job. You don't even need to know what the shutter speed is. It's just going to work because it stays open until it's seen enough light. That means you could put this camera on a tripod in a dim scene with changing light conditions, fire the shutter, and even if there's light moving and stuff like that, you will get a perfect exposure every time. The second special feature of this camera is actually my favorite, and that is spot metering. Most cameras from that era, except like when you start getting to the professional level, didn't have spot metering. The older cameras, like my Canon cameras, these don't have spot metering. The way Olympus did it was really nice. The circle in the center of the viewfinder that you use for focusing, that is the spot. That actually covers 2% of the frame. So your spot that you are metering on is 2% of the frame. Spot metering is available only in manual mode. Instead of seeing the shutter speeds on the little thing on the side of the viewfinder, you're going to see little arrows and an LCD representation of the match needle kind of thing that we used back in the day. It's pretty cool. So when you aim the spot at something, the camera's going to show you the meter reading live, and you can do things like open up the aperture or adjust the shutter speed and watch as the needle moves. The meter shows you 2 stops above and 2 stops below. So you could use your spot meter to meter the shadows or something like that. Now, let me explain how exposure works for something like this. It took me years to get it. So many years. I feel silly because it took me way too long to understand that the camera doesn't know a darn thing about what's in front of it. It just sees light. It doesn't know you're shooting a scene with snow. It doesn't know that you're aimed at the shadow under the tree. All it knows is it sees light, and it's going to set its exposure so that's 18% gray all the time. So with matrix metering and fancier metering modes, the camera does a pretty good job of it. But with spot metering, it's totally on you, and you have to do a little bit of thinking. This is where the zone system comes in. You know, Ansel Adams in the zone system, where zone 5 is the middle, that's your middle gray. And then you start getting into brighter things, zone 6, zone 7, zone 8. At some point, you hit those things that are absolute the brightest, and then you go 4, 3, and 2, and you get to the blackest black. Typically, you would take something that's a shadow, like shadows under a tree, where you want to see detail, but you want it to be very dim shadows. And you would put that in, say, zone 3. And so the way you use a spot meter on a camera like this is you aim the spot at the shadows and adjust your aperture or your shutter speed, either one, until the needle goes 2 stops low. Now you know that the camera's going to underexpose by 2 stops that section, and it's going to come out perfect. It's going to place that in zone 3. 2 stops below zone 5. If you want to put the shadows in zone 2, then this meter doesn't have 3 stops of movement. It's going to show you up to 2. So just put the needle in the middle, get it exposed properly. That's zone 5. And then go 1, 2, 3. Click, click, click. 3 stops on your aperture or 3 stops on your shutter speed. And you do the same thing if you want to brighten it up. It's actually very easy to use. Super convenient. I love it. Spot metering for the win. I can't wait until I can get out and start shooting. Olympus did some pretty neat stuff with the way they metered light in this camera. If you just look at it, you open it up, it really does look like there is one little sensor at the bottom, one silicon photodiode right in the bottom. How could they meter using one photodiode? At first glance, it seems like, well, okay, great. Well, they do their little off the film thing and all is good. But there's a few nuances. How is the camera metering when you're looking through the viewfinder and moving the camera around? It's actually giving you live meter readings. So they've done something special. And how is it doing spot metering versus the center weighted metering? Turns out that the mirror, like many, is semi-silvered in the center. The center section of the mirror is semi-silvered. So some of the light that's hitting the mirror passes through, and it hits a secondary mirror, which you can kind of see peeking through in the back. You can kind of see this sort of a Fresnel lens look on the secondary mirror looking through the main mirror. And that's how the camera meters light when you are looking through the viewfinder. The light going to the viewfinder, some of it passes through the mirror, hits that little Fresnel lens mirror, which points it down to this sensor at the bottom of the camera. And when you take a photo, when the main mirror flips up, the secondary mirror springs up right behind it. Now, the second piece of magic is, how does this camera do spot mode? At first I was thinking, well, maybe there's some optic that gets flipped in there, or maybe there's some, maybe the mirror is different. But no, when you have the camera open and you switch to manual mode, nothing changes. When you have the lens on and you switch to manual mode, nothing changes. You hear nothing. There's no mechanical thing happening. So it has to be strictly electronic. And looking at the service manual, you get a bit of a hint. It actually tells you that there's this thing called IC101 that contains 2 sensors. So that little thing which we can see inside there actually has 2 photodiodes in it. And the documentation doesn't go into detail. And looking at it with a magnifier and with a dental mirror, I couldn't see anything that would let me know how this worked. So I can only imagine that it's designed kind of like a bullseye with one photodiode in the center and another one around it or something like that. But regardless of how they actually built it, the camera has 2 photodiodes in the bottom, and it reads one photodiode for center weighted metering and the other photodiode for spot metering. That's how they handle those 2 cases. So there you go. Mildly complicated for the time, and it does a great job. Let me compare this to the other SLRs that I shoot. Well, this is the Canon A1. It's a beautiful camera, and it has both aperture priority and shutter priority, as well as program mode and manual. It's a great camera, released in 1978. Its younger brother is the Canon AE1 program. This camera right here was released in 1981 and is one of the favorites of the internet. This doesn't have aperture priority. It has shutter priority alone, but this is a great camera. There's something really intriguing about these cameras. When the Olympus OM-2S was released in 1984, they were still selling the Canon AE1 program and the Canon A1. In fact, I had to go to a popular photography magazine from 1985, February of 1985, in order to actually find prices for this, because you know how B&H and the other sellers would do. They would, on new cameras, and they would have next to the camera name, it would say call for price. So you have to wait a few months until you actually can get a real price. B&H was selling this camera. Let me get my cheat sheet out here. The Olympus OM-2S program with an f1.4 lens was $267 in February of 1985. That converts to $816 in 2026. Now, if we look at the Canon AE1 program, this camera was sold for $250 with an f1.4 lens. That's $764 today. And then if we go to the OG, the 1978 Canon A1, they were still selling this. And this camera with the f1.4 lens sold for $300 in February of 1985. That converts to $917 today. That's intriguing because this old camera with old features was selling for more than a newer camera with much better features. Part of that was inertia and brand recognition, and the fact that many people were bought into the Canon system. So if you're a Canon shooter, you're not going to be looking at this camera. They were able to keep the price pretty high on the A1 and the AE1 program. In fact, the Canon A1 is a very good camera. It's very well made, but it was getting long in the tooth. So there you go. This little guy came out, and it was actually cheaper than older cameras that just didn't deliver the same amount of goods. Tell me in the comments about why that was. I'm not an Olympus guy. Maybe Olympus was a lesser brand. I don't know. Maybe it's just the system lock-in. Don't know. Tell me why this camera wasn't selling for more, why the Canons weren't selling for less. Let's talk about drawbacks. First is this camera was released at a time when most other cameras were bragging about 1/4000th of a second shutter speeds. This goes up to 1,000th of a second. Not a big deal for me, but there it is. Another thing that I don't particularly care for, the self-timer mode is really finicky to engage. They should have done a better job with that little control. It's a little lever that you have to get your fingernail under, lift it up, and push it to the left or the right. Something which might not work for many people is the way you set your shutter speed. You've got these two little ears on this ring, and you dial that. That's how you choose shutter speed. It's not that familiar to people who are used to shutter speed on the top of the camera and aperture on the front. Not much else bad I can say about the camera. It feels solid. This is actually a better feeling camera than the Canon AE1 program. I like it. It feels nice in the hands, solid. Other thing I really like about this is just the simplicity. There's its modes. Program, auto, manual. Something else really cool, there's no power switch. These cameras, they have a power switch on them. And the designers put the switch in a way where when you put the camera in the bag, it's going to turn the power on when you bump it. I don't know why they did that. There's no power switch on this camera. It's great. It goes to sleep when you aren't using it. You don't have to cover anything. It's not like it has a light meter that's continually working or anything. The camera goes to sleep. You click the shutter, half click, that wakes it up, but then I don't know, maybe 30 seconds later, it goes back to sleep. There's no need to turn it off. It's great. The batteries, it uses two little batteries that you can buy today. No weird mercury batteries or anything like that. It's got some features, which I have no idea what they are. There's this jack up here, which probably does amazing things. There's like 5 pins. Who knows what that is? The off-the-film exposure works with flash as well. I am not a flash user, therefore this is not going to help me. But if you're a flash user and use the right kind of flash, this camera will do great things. I'm not a fan of the focus screen. The one that came with it simply has a little circle in the middle with microprisms. I'm used to focusing using a split prism focus aid, the kind where you line up two sections of a vertical line or something, and this one doesn't have that. On the positive note, there are many replacement viewfinder screens out there, and it comes with a little tool and everything. You can find them on eBay. So I think I'm going to get a replacement viewfinder screen for this that has the split prism, but I really haven't been able to shoot it enough to determine if that microprism array is a burden. It might be a better way to focus. I don't know. Looking at the top, you see we have the film advance. We have a little button with an R on it that releases the rewind mechanism. It just releases the spool inside. There's the shutter release. We have a combination ISO selector and compensation, exposure compensation. 2 up and 2 down. Just like that. And on the left side of the top, we have a battery check. There's program mode, auto mode, and manual spot mode. And we have the rewind lever. On the front of the camera, we'll see a connector that does something very important, I'm sure. This little gray line is where the light enters the camera to illuminate the meter. It's not the actual exposure meter, but this is where the light that lights up the meter on the side of the viewfinder comes in. When this little window doesn't provide enough light for the meter, you can press this small button right here, and that'll give you about 10 seconds of light on the meter. We have this little thing down here which controls your self-timer. It's a real pain to use. Probably the weakest part of this camera is the design of the self-timer. You kind of lift it and twist. It's a pain. On the sides of the camera, you'll see nothing of interest. Nothing of interest. I will point out that when you open it, just like a lot of other cameras of the era, you can remove the back. There is a little slider right here that'll release a pin so that you can take the camera back off and install a date back or something like that. On the bottom, we have a battery cover and 2 little batteries fit in there. There's contacts for the auto winder. There's your tripod mount. And this little hole right here has mechanical connections for the auto winder. This is actually how the winder winds the film. And this little lever inside here, it's kind of hard to see. There's a little lever inside there. That's the shutter release. There's a little cover, just like the battery cover, that screws on. But mine was messed up and it would squeeze the shutter release. So I couldn't get the camera to function correctly with the cover in place. As soon as I removed that, all the problems went away. So I have no problem leaving this little cover off for the rest of the life of this camera. This camera has all of its fun stuff on the lens and around the lens. I really like that. The lens comes off by squeezing this little button right here, and counterclockwise twist, lens pops off. And then it's got the traditional red dot right there. Line it up with the dot, twist and click. The shutter speed is controlled by this dial. There's 2 ears that you can use to adjust the shutter speed, and you'll see that it goes click, 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 click. Shutter speed is ignored in any mode except manual. That is when you're in program mode or auto mode, the camera ignores what you've set for shutter speed. This is an aperture priority camera. There's 2 special positions that form the exception to that rule, and that is you have a red 60 and a red B. if you can see those, a red 60 and a red B. That stands for bulb, of course, and 1/60th of a second. This is your lifeline if your battery dies. You go down to the bottom corner here, and there's a lock button right here. And you press that lock button in. And now you can twist the shutter speed dial. And I'm going to put it on the 60, and it's going to shoot 1/60th of a second. This doesn't require a battery at all. It's your lifeline. However, if you do that, you lose all your exposure, metering, and all of that. But in a pinch, you can put it on 1/60th of a second and set your aperture manually, and you'll be golden. And of course, B is bulb. Does exactly what you'd expect. So let's put the shutter speed somewhere in the middle, and we'll set the aperture to the smallest aperture, the f/16, and we'll put it on program. What's going to happen is when we frame our subject, we'll see the meter inside is going to say a shutter speed. It'll tell us like 1/250th of a second or 1/60th of a second. And that's what it's going to give us. We don't get to choose aperture or shutter speed in program mode. It's going to do everything for us. Then we can go to auto mode. That's our aperture priority, where you pick your aperture for artistic reasons, whatever you want, and look through the viewfinder half press, and it's going to show you the shutter speed that it thinks it's going to use. Another feature I'm going to show you on this is these lenses have the stop-down feature, the depth of field preview feature built into the lens. Other cameras, you have a special lever you have to press on the camera. On these Olympus lenses, this button here stops down the lens. So you can look right through the viewfinder, press the button, and it'll give you a preview of what your depth of field is going to look like. Focusing, exactly what you'd expect. Nice and smooth. The camera warns you if you're going to be overexposed. In auto mode, I'm going to put it on a wide aperture and point it at the light. And it's beeping. Close down the aperture, and it stops. If we look inside, you'll see at the very bottom of the camera, it's kind of hard to see it, but right there, that's where the sensor lives. It's in that little divot in the bottom of the camera, and it's pointing up at the film plane. It's in there, angled up and towards the back. And there's nothing more going on there. I'll put this in bulb and show you. And you could see that on the back of the mirror is a secondary mirror. And it's a little tab that's sort of flipped up there. And when the mirror comes down, that little flap is going to flip out and angle the light down to the sensor. Now, here's the sensor again. You can see the divot much better, and there's the film plane. We're actually looking at the pressure plate right now. So the sensor is in that little scooped out divot. And the last thing I'm going to show you is the pattern that's on the shutter curtain that is used for metering when the camera is above the flash sync speed. I'm going to have to use self-timer mode. It's the only way to get the curtain to show itself. Do this, and there you go. You can see the pattern. And there it is. This camera was more trouble to load than I expected. It loads just like any other mid-80s 35mm camera. However, the take-up spool is kind of fiddly. And Normally, I use my film like this. I take my leader and I clip it at a 45-degree angle. And that works just fine in almost all cameras, except this one. This camera really requires you to cut something approximating the leader on a new roll of film. So you kind of have to have this sort of skinny strip. Otherwise, it's not going to fit. Now we're ready to go. When you're done, press the R button right there. And rewind. There's no indicator that the film is rewinding. On Canon cameras, there's a little dot on the bottom that spins around as the sprocket is turning, and you can watch that dot and see that film is moving. This camera, you can't. Let me tell you something about this camera. If you're testing the camera, taking a bunch of test shots without film, the meter is going to be all wonky. It's going to seem like the thing's broken. The reason is because the camera's actually metering off of the surface of the film, and that's what you see right now. If you take the film out, it's going to be metering off of the darker and shinier surface of the pressure plate. It's just going to be all wonky. Without any film in the camera, the meter readings are all over the place. Let's take a look at those photos. Here's the first one I shot, which was my wife's watering can. And you can see this was a fairly complex photo from a lighting perspective, with the sunlight in the background and the shadows in front. Here's another similar photo. Again, direct sunlight and shadow. Here's a photo in our living room, and I think it got the exposure just right. And a photo in the kitchen. And this one, again, complex exposure with a backlit situation. Here's another photo in the kitchen, and I really like the way that the lens rendered this little olive oil thing. And my daughter's dolls look a little rough at HP 5+. Maybe I should use some finer grain film next time. I don't know if the Olympus OM-2S is going to unseat the Canon A1 as my favorite daily shooter, but it has a pretty good chance of it. I won't know until the weather warms up and lets me go out there and shoot some. It's not pleasant shooting in sub-zero temperatures. That's all I got for you today. Thank you for watching. Now go out and shoot a roll.